Humanity Matters.
Hello, and welcome to HMTV's Humanity Matters. My name is Dr. Dan Holtzman, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Stephanie Weeks, and we're here for our podcast entitled Leadership and Lessons from the Holocaust. Today's guest, Professor Michael Dobkowski from Hobart William Smith College in New York, has graciously joined us today to talk about the legacy of a humane future and how this can be imparted to leaders in education. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. So, in our initial meeting, I had given you a homework assignment. Oftentimes, podcast hosts don't give their guests homework assignments, but in this case, I had asked that you maybe find a story or an anecdote that ties into this theme of legacy and of a humane future. And maybe share a 90-second, 2-minute summary before we get into the actual podcast. And if before that, if you could tell our listening audience just a little bit about yourself and how you ended up where you are as a professor.
So I studied history at New York University and received my master's and PhD from NYU, and was started to study Jewish studies while I was in graduate school. And actually, it was a interdisciplinary program that I was in at NYU. I came to Hobart and William Smith colleges, that's what it was called then, coordinated colleges, in 1977. As the first person teaching Judaic studies at Hobart and William Smith. And from the very beginning of my teaching career, 1977, I started to teach courses on the Holocaust. And I've been teaching courses on the Holocaust for my entire academic career from 1977 to the present. I also established at Hobart and William Smith a Holocaust Studies program, Holocaust Studies minor, and in 2002, with some other colleagues, we established a student study leadership mission to Germany and Poland right after the end of the spring semester. It's a 10-day trip. Couple of days in Germany and about 5 or 6 days in Poland. And every other year we take students on that trip, about 30 students. My professional career in terms of publication has also sort of moved in the direction of Holocaust studies and genocide studies and comparative genocide studies. So this has been really my life's work, I would say a passion of mine for almost 50 years. I think I was thinking about what story to tell. I think very briefly, if I could, and I'll try to do it in 2 minutes, I want to talk very briefly about three very influential people who lived through and died in two of the three cases during the Holocaust period that had a profound impact on me, on my thinking and my teaching, and I think on my students. So it's going to be very, very brief. But hopefully this might give you some sense of how I see the potential role of a teacher in terms of impacting students, not just in the classroom now, but in the future. The first person I want to briefly just mention is Rabbi Joachim Prinz. Rabbi Prinz was a rabbi in Berlin and was expelled by the Nazis in 1937 and came to the United States and had a very distinguished career in the United States. Maybe most important about him in terms of his contribution in the United States, I would say two things. One, as a 27-year-old rabbi, he was courageous and spoke out against the Nazis in Berlin and became such a nuisance, in fact, that they expelled him rather than what could have been some other possibilities. And he came to the United States and had a profound impact on the Reform movement in America, the Reform Jewish movement in America, as well as civil rights and social justice movements. He's maybe most well known for his collaboration, his friendship with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. In the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And in fact, he was the speaker right before Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech in 1963. And in that speech, he talks about two main themes that I think are important to me and I think can be relevant to our conversation. One is the theme of the danger of silence, that we can't be silent in the presence of evil and injustice, and that this is not just a social or political imperative, but this is almost for him a religious or spiritual imperative. And the other thing he emphasizes in that speech right before he passed the microphone, so to speak, over to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is the fact that we have to we live in community, and we have to cultivate a sense of being a neighbor, and by being a neighbor, that means you're responsible for the people that you live with, not just in your own community. What I'm really thinking about here is modeling. Often as teachers, as professors, we think about our role of modeling, about the impact that we can have on students and the impact we can have on colleagues. And this is something that Rabbi Joachim Prinz exemplified. The other two people I want to just briefly mention is, and these two individuals did not survive the Holocaust. There's the very famous, certainly famous in Poland, less famous in the United States, educator and pediatrician and children's author, Dr. Janusz Korczak. And he's well known for a lot of things. Oftentimes when we think about Janusz Korczak, we think about his end. We think about how he faced the end of his life in the Warsaw Ghetto with 196 of the children who were in his orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. That's, of course, important. That's emblematic of his philosophy, of his approach, of his really his system of looking at children as being really small adults, but with agency and with responsibility. And our responsibility as adults who work with children is to enable children to reach their potential. And of course, tragically, on August 5th or August 6th, we're not sure of the exact date, 1942, he marched with his 196 children and 10 staff people from the orphanage inside the Warsaw Ghetto to the place of gathering, to the Umschlagplatz, where they were taken to Treblinka and probably were killed that same day. And also in the Warsaw Ghetto is somebody that I think also inspired me, and that's Dr. Emanuel Ringelblum, who's responsible for the creation of a sort of secret research project within the Warsaw Ghetto that he named Oneg Shabbos, the celebration of the Sabbath. And this was a group of about 60 people who collected testimonies, who wrote descriptions of what was actually going on in the ghetto. And their goal, his goal, was if they couldn't save people, but they maybe could save the stories of people. if they could save the stories of people, then the people in some ways would still live on. And that's what this archive accomplished. Thousands and thousands of testimonies and pieces of paper were buried in milk cans and containers. And two of these collections of material were found after the war. And again, it's an inspiration. It's the point that we have impacts in many different ways. People might think of this as intellectual resistance, as spiritual resistance, as memory resistance, and these are all ideas that I think we can impart to students through the study of the Holocaust.
Just for anecdotal purposes, Stephanie and I had gone to Poland 2 summers ago, and we were on the tour, and we did see the milk cans that you are describing. So it's interesting to us that you are referencing something that we actually had firsthand sight of on our trip. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to start the questions for you.
Thank you for sharing those stories with us. Our original purpose and intention of these opportunities was to hear more stories and to draw these connections between history and these demonstrations of leadership and courage. There are so many of them, but we want to draw that connection to our world today and our development of future leaders. When you think about your experiences, you clearly have many years of experience. You have deep studies. From your personal lens, when you hear the phrase, hope for a legacy of a humane future, what does that mean to you as a scholar of Holocaust studies?
I think this really in some ways goes to the very core of why I do Holocaust studies, why it's become a passion of mine. And it's a question that people often ask, is there hope in studying these periods of history, or this period of history in particular? It seems so dark, it seems so tragic. Of course it is. But my answer is yes. There's, as you said, there's so many examples of hope. There's so many examples of courage. There's so many examples of people who survived to build new lives after the war, or examples of people who extended themselves to Jews and other potential victims and risked their lives to do that. In the balance of things, if we look at the balance, we might say, and people do say, well, there were 6 million victims or 6.5 million victims or whatever the number actually is. And how many people actually extended themselves? How many rescuers were there? How many people, risked their lives? But I don't think we can look at it that way. It's not a numbers game, because obviously the Nazis were intent on perpetrating a genocide, which they did, and they were very successful at it. And this was an incredibly important part of what they were doing during this World War II period. And in the context of this overwhelming evil and this overwhelming threat, the fact that people could extend themselves to other people, that victims could extend themselves to other victims, that people would share things, that people would hide Jews. There's so many examples of that. I think it points to sort of what somebody once called the Janus-faced aspect of the Holocaust experience. There, of course, is radical evil, but there's also radical good. I mean, Hannah Arendt famously talked about the banality of evil, but why don't we talk about the banality of good, meaning the ordinariness of good? it seems like it's overwhelmed. It seems like goodness is overwhelmed by the evil. But again, it's not something we quantify. I would argue that in the face of such overwhelming evil, that the fact that there was good does provide hope, does provide modeling, does reinforce the idea that we human beings can make decisions. We human beings are responsible for the decisions we make and we don't make. And through the study, I think, of human behavior in extreme circumstances, which certainly the Holocaust was, we learn a lot about human beings. We learn a lot about how we behave or can behave and what we are capable of, both on the negative side and on the positive side. So for me, yes, of course, there's a lot of, there's despair sometimes, or maybe often when you study this material, but there is also hope in it. And, our trip, like I mentioned briefly before, that we take students on, we call it bearing witness to hope. It's a similar kind of language that you expressed in your question to me, or the theme of this conversation. It is based on the premise that there is hope in this experience, that we can find hope. If we can find hope in this experience, if we can find light in this darkness, it's incredibly bright, if you know what I mean. The hope is incredibly hopeful. So that's the goal. And I, from my experience, both in the classroom and taking students on these trips and hearing them, and it's a very diverse group that we take, mostly not Jewish students, because we have a small Jewish population at Hobart and William Smith. So we take students of all ethnicities and religions or no religions, and of course some Jewish students. That itself, maybe I'll just end the answer to this question. That itself provides hope. What I mean is that when you encounter, or when you can generate interest among students, among a diverse group of students, and you see that they engage, and you see that they're impacted, and you read what they write about their experiences and in their reflections, to me, that provides hope. I mean, that means that, yes, Emanuel Ringelblum was right. We have to tell their stories. We tell their stories. They can inspire us, even in the darkness, maybe especially in the darkness.
Thank you for that, Michael. That was a very insightful response, and we appreciate that. So in moving along with the theme, as Stephanie had intimated before, about leadership and the leadership qualities, based on your extensive experience, I mean, you yourself are a leader. You started programming. You created a minor for Holocaust studies, and clearly you're a leader in the field. From your experience and what you know about the educational system, what in your opinion are the qualities that an educational leader at any level, particularly high school, because that's and public education, K-12, because that's really our domain. What are the qualities that you think really distinguish leaders who successfully cultivate a culture of humanity and ethical responsibility? We are always told that we have a responsibility to mold and influence the next generation of leaders. So we, like you mentioned before, we have to model that ourselves. But in the theme of this and of Holocaust studies and the atrocities that took place, and as educational leaders, you want to never have that happen again. What exactly do you believe educational leaders should be exemplifying?
It's a great question, and it's really the challenge for us, isn't it? Whether we're teaching, Holocaust studies or other subjects, I think it starts. I can just give you my experience, or how I think I've tried to exemplify this in my professional career. I think it actually starts with yourself. You have to be true. This is going to sound like a cliche, but you have to be true to yourself. You have to know what you believe, and you have to model, I'll use that word again, your beliefs, your passions, your insights, your ideas, and they have to be authentic. They can't be, fabricated. They can't be invented. It has to be who you are as a person, who you are as an educator, and how you run your own classroom, how you run your classroom, how you interact with your students, and how you foster a community of interaction and respect and responsibility in your classroom. From there, I think leadership can emerge. I mean, it requires initiative, clearly. It requires energy. It requires ideas. But it also requires, I think, it begins with this basis of modeling. I remember, it's sort of been a motto of mine. I say it a lot in the classroom. The philosopher Martin Buber once wrote a very short essay talking about teaching, and he said that all great teaching is pointing. And what did he mean by that? In other words, good teaching is not telling. In some ways, I don't like the title professor, because we shouldn't be professing anything to our students. We should be suggesting. We should be pointing. That's what Martin Buber meant. And we should be creating an environment where the students can come to knowledge, to the conclusions, to decisions, not exclusively on their own. We're there to assist, we're there to suggest, we're there to point, but we're not there to profess. So if we want to create students who are already adults, who are going to go out into the world as more mature adults and create a more humane world and a world of responsibility, I actually do think that we have not just the responsibility of doing that in the classroom, but it's really our obligation if we're capable, to the extent that we're capable. That's what our mission should be. So I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly. It's not a science. I don't think I can give you like 5 steps of whatever it is.
No, but I think you raise a good point though about the professing versus pointing, versus suggesting, versus creating opportunities for questioning and learning and investigation and research. I think those are critical. And from the seats that Stephanie and I sit in, it starts with building leadership. It starts with district leadership. You have to espouse that sort of approach and philosophy to education, and allow teachers to the freedom to think a little bit differently than, I'm a teacher, so I'm teaching you this. Shouldn't it be more about being inquisitive? Shouldn't it be more about challenging status quo? Shouldn't it be more about challenging, behaviors and wondering, how could something like that have happened? How could humans respond in that way to other humans? And then what do I now as a human in the 21st century? What is my responsibility? And I think that becomes part of a larger conversation. It goes beyond the scope of, what New York State requires us to teach, because we want critical thinkers and we want empathetic, kind humans going into the world after they leave us in the public schools and end up in your classroom. we want to prepare them for those kinds of conversations and opportunities. So I think you absolutely did answer that question, and I'm very appreciative of that insight. So Stephanie's going to wrap it up with one last question, and then we'll say our thank yous. Go ahead, Steph.
I also want to thank you for that response. I think it is a shift in our thinking around education and being an educational leader, in that we have to share these stories with students and inspire them to think critically about those. And so I deeply appreciated that response. Giving you an opportunity to speak directly to the next generation of educators and students, what message would you share to inspire them to carry forward a humane legacy?
Yeah, I would build on the theme of hope and reject the tendency to despair and the tendency to think, what could I possibly do? What could we possibly change? I think, and this is one of the experiences, the goals of focusing, for example, on the Holocaust. It's important to focus on it because it was an incredibly impactful, important moment in history. But it's important to focus on it because, and now I'm speaking as a historian more generally, if we can't appreciate what happened in the past, if we can't understand it in all of its dimensions, the negative and the positive dimensions, so to speak, then we can't possibly bring any lessons of that period to the present. So my message would be to students and to educators that what you're teaching or what you're suggesting or what you're modeling is incredibly relevant, even if it happened 80 years ago or whatever the event is. It's incredibly relevant to the experiences that we have facing us. Without getting terribly specific, where we in America and in Europe, many other parts of the world, we're facing challenges that are reminiscent of some of the challenges and some of the developments of 75, 80 years ago. I'm not drawing necessarily comparisons, but there's no doubt that there are things going on in the world today that should be reminding us of things that went on 75, 80 years ago. So my message is hold on to the hope, hold on to the belief, and it's not just an empty belief. I think it's actually grounded in reality that what you're experiencing in the classroom, what you're studying, what you're beginning to understand, maybe what you're becoming even passionate about, is relevant to the world in which you live. And your obligation as a thinking, critical thinking human being is to interrogate those connections. Think about them. What are they? How real are they, so to speak? What can you learn? And I think if we can, if we can impart that message, if I can impart that message to teachers and students, it would be a message of relevance and a message of hope and a relevance of actual, activity. One of the things that students often say to me and my other colleagues is, what can I do with this information? I need to do something with it. Now that I know something, so as I think I mentioned to Dan a few days ago, Elie Wiesel famously probably said 1,000 times that, once you're witnessing to this material, once you hear these stories, once you learn learn about these events, you can't unlearn them. You shouldn't unlearn them. You're now a witness. You have to do something with it. What are you going to do with this material? What are you going to do with these insights? I can't tell you when you're going to act upon them in some hopefully responsible way, but I can tell you that you can, you will, you probably should. It will shape how you live your life. You may not recognize it at the moment, but you'll recognize it as you reflect on decisions you're making in life and that you're not making in life. So, that would be my message to students. Become a messenger, internalize the material, and find a way to responsibly live as a humane person in this complicated world. Whether it's in your circle of acquaintances or friends or family or however wide you make that circle, we have a profound impact on the people that we interact with. We don't even know the impact that we have. All of us do. It's like that pebble skipping across the pond. It's the ripples keep going. We don't really know, and but just know that you do, and how you live your life, and decisions you make, and what activities you may engage in. These are all going to have impact on many people beyond your circle of responsibility, so to speak.
That's a great way to end, Michael. Thank you so much. And I do want to thank you not even so much for just offering your time to us and for giving us that insight, but for being our first official guest on this podcast. It was amazing. I hope that you will join us again, because there's so much we would love to learn from you and talk to you about. So I hope if we connect again, that you'd be willing to join us again. That being said, I want to thank my co-host, Dr. Stephanie Weeks, and I want to thank our listeners for tuning into this episode of Leadership and Lessons from the Holocaust. I appreciate Dr. Dobkowski for being here. And be sure to subscribe and share and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care and be well.